Before we begin, thank you for being here. This is a story about one human translator inside the Galaxy Council. She refuses to let Earth's grief be changed into guilt. No fleet protects her. No weapon saves her. Only one question remains. When humanity says, "We are sorry," does the galaxy hear mercy or confession? Now, let's begin. The woman who refused to translate Earth's apology, Clara Mercer, heard the warning tone before anyone in the reception corridor looked afraid. It came as a low pulse through the wall panels of Aurelian Accord Hall, a neutral diplomatic station built inside the quiet orbit of Verdun, a pale moon watched by 3 council security fleets. The hall was not a battlefield or a tribunal. It was supposed to be a place where species that distrusted each other could stand under the same roof long enough to sign agreements without reaching for weapons. Clara was there as Earth's chief diplomatic translator, assigned to the treaty ceremony between Earth and the Ver Dominion. In public, her job sounded simple. In truth, it was one of the most dangerous jobs in the room, because she had to make sure Earth was heard with the meaning Earth intended, not with the meaning a machine could flatten into law. The treaty itself was practical. Earth would send doctors, cargo pilots, and emergency engineers to Ver colonies damaged by border raids. In return, the Ver Dominion would open protected routes for Earth vessels across 3 trade lanes that had been dangerous for years. If the ceremony went well, Earth would gain standing. If it went badly, the older powers inside the Galaxy Council would say what they had always wanted to say. Humanity was too young, too emotional, and too unstable to sit close to the center of interstellar politics. Clara knew that pressure before she entered the hall. She stood inside a narrow translation prep suite with one hand on the glass table and the other hovering over a council transcript slate. Around her, quiet machines listened to every language stream moving through the building. The machines did not breathe, hesitate, grieve, or soften a sentence because a living person would hear it. They converted sound into meaning labels, then meaning labels into legal effect. That was the part Clara distrusted. Across the table, Ambassador Jonas Rell adjusted the cuffs of his dark Earth delegation jacket. He was a careful man in his late 50s, with tired eyes and the voice of someone who had spent too many years stopping small insults from becoming wars. He had argued for Clara to be placed beside him at the ceremony, because he understood her value. He also feared what her precision could cost. "Stay close to the approved phrasing," Jonas said. Clara did not look up from the transcript. "I always do, when the approved phrasing tells the truth." He sighed. He was not angry, only worn down. This is not the day for a fight over nuance. Nuance is why I'm here. The slate showed the opening statement Earth had submitted that morning. Clara had written the final version herself. It was formal but warm, clear enough for council procedure and human enough that it did not sound like a contract between machines. Earth honors the losses of the Ver Dominion and stands ready to help rebuild what was taken. The council system had rendered it as Earth recognizes the Ver Dominion's losses and accepts procedural participation in restoration. Clara tapped the line. It removed honors. It removed stands ready. It removed help. Jonas glanced at the slate. It made the sentence safer. It made it colder. Cold is not always bad in this hall. Clara finally looked at him. Cold is not the same as neutral. Before Jonas could answer, the door opened and a Ver escort entered with 2 council ushers behind him. The Ver were tall, narrow-boned, and silver-gray, with breathing collars that shimmered around their throats like rings of dark glass. Their species needed a regulated air mixture in enclosed habitats, and their delegation wore ceremonial blue bands across their shoulders in memory of the dead from their raided colonies. The escort inclined his head. "The signing chamber is prepared. Marshal Sava Run requests the Earth delegation within 4 minutes." Marshal Sava Run led the Ver delegation. Clara had studied her speeches for 2 weeks. Sava was blunt, disciplined, and grieving. She had lost a younger brother in one of the border raids the treaty was meant to answer. That made Sava dangerous, but not because she was cruel. It made her dangerous because her pain was real. Clara closed the transcript and followed Jonas into the corridor. Aurelian Accord Hall spread before them in white stone, amber glass, and suspended banners from 60 member species. The main chamber rose at the center like a bowl turned toward the stars. Every spoken word inside that chamber was routed through the Council translation lattice, certified by the Interstellar Concordance Bureau, and stored in a legal archive. That archive could later be used in hearings, sanctions, trade disputes, or emergency votes. Most diplomats treated the system as a miracle. Clara treated it as a loaded weapon that everyone had agreed to call a bridge. The first warning tone came as she reached the archway to the signing chamber. It was low, almost polite. Council buildings dislike panic. The floor lights shifted from white to soft gold, guiding non-essential staff away from the inner doors. The Vare escort stopped. Jonas looked toward Clara, as if she might already know the meaning of the sound. A second tone followed, longer this time. Then the chamber doors sealed. Through the amber glass, Clara saw movement inside. Vare aides turned toward the left ventilation wall. Council ushers raised their wrists to speak into emergency channels. A cluster of Vare delegates stepped back from the signing dais, their breathing collars flickering from blue to red. Clara moved toward the glass. A council security officer caught her arm. "Remain outside. The Vare atmosphere feed is failing," Clara said. The officer's eyes hardened. He was Corvin, broad-faced and pale, from a species that believed stillness meant authority. "Remain outside." Inside the chamber, one of the Vare delegates dropped to one knee. Jonas whispered, "Clara." The third tone became an alarm. The chamber's internal screens switched to emergency script. The Council translation lattice displayed the words "environmental containment stabilization in progress." Clara stared at the phrase and felt her stomach tighten. Stabilization was not what she saw. She saw a sealed chamber, a failed atmosphere route, and Vare delegates whose breathing collars were shutting down under incompatible air. Marshal Sava appeared near the dais, trying to pull two younger aides toward a secondary exit. The exit did not open. The council ushers outside shouted for manual override. The system refused them with calm blue text. Clara stepped close to the glass and read the smaller diagnostic line beneath the public alert. It flashed for less than a second, but she caught enough. The console displayed a line that read, "Priority Containment Order. Source Authority, Internal Security Lattice." Not Earth equipment, not a Vare device. The order came from inside the council system. By the time the doors opened again, 8 Vare delegates were dead. Several more were carried out by emergency teams. The signing dais, prepared for a treaty, became a triage floor. Savarin stood beside a fallen aide, one hand pressed to the aide's shoulder, her face still with the kind of grief that had not yet found sound. Clara had translated after disasters before. She knew the first minutes mattered. In those minutes, language could carry mercy, blame, or panic. It could keep people from tearing at each other before facts had shape. The council moved faster than grief. Within 19 minutes, the Emergency Protocol Office summoned Earth, Vare, and the Concordance Bureau to a sealed briefing chamber. Within 27 minutes, council media channels announced a catastrophic protocol breach during an Earth-linked treaty ceremony. Within 31 minutes, Jonas received a prepared statement marked for immediate delivery. He read it once and went pale. Clara took the slate from him. At the top was Earth's original emergency line, sent by Jonas in the first honest shock after the chamber opened. "We grieve with you. Earth will assist fully in finding the cause." Below was the Council certified rendering, already stamped by the Interstellar Concordance Bureau. "We accept guilt before you. Earth will comply fully in assigning responsibility." For a moment, the room narrowed around Clara. The air, the table, and the distant voices from the corridor all felt as if they had been pulled behind thick glass. Jonas whispered, "That is not what I sent." "No," Clara said. "It is not." A council crisis secretary entered, flanked by 2 bureau officials in slate gray. One of them placed a hand over the transcript seal. "Ambassador Rel, Earth must deliver the certified statement within 7 minutes. Vare Dominion forces are holding at their embassy docks. Several member blocks are requesting immediate assignment of fault." A delay will be interpreted as refusal to mourn. This wording is wrong, Clara said. The secretary looked at her, as if she had commented on the color of the walls while the building burned. The wording is certified. Certified is not the same as correct. One of the bureau officials lifted his chin. Chief Translator Mercer, the council lattice has rendered the emotional structure into legal clarity. It has rendered grief into guilt. Earth expressed sorrow. In council emergency doctrine, sorrow from a linked participant indicates accepted burden. Clara felt Jonas shift beside her. He wanted to survive the hour. She wanted that too, but she could see the trap forming. If Earth read the statement, the archive would close around it. Vare would hear confession. Council blocks would hear liability. Trade courts would hear precedent. Years later, when Earth tried to correct the record, the Bureau would say the words had been certified under emergency authority. A viewing wall opened at the front of the room, revealing the main press channel. Billions of listeners across council space were waiting. The lower banner already read Earth delegation to address fatal breach. The secretary gestured toward the live podium. Now, Ambassador. Jonas turned to Clara. His eyes asked for help and begged her not to make the wound wider. Clara took the slate and walked with him to the podium. The press chamber was a crescent of hovering lenses, council recorders, and alien delegates standing in clusters of shock. Vare mourners watched from the left platform. Sovereign stood among them, motionless. Her breathing collar pulsed black with formal grief. Jonas began with the approved opening. His voice was steady enough, but Clara could see his hands tighten around the edge of the podium. When the moment came for the translated statement, the council lattice activated above Clara's station. The certified words waited in pale blue. We accept guilt before you. Clara placed her hand over the translation control and shut the lattice off. A ripple moved through the chamber. Council officials leaned toward their channels. The bureau official behind her inhaled sharply. Clara spoke in plain English first, then in trade common by her own voice, without the bureau's legal filter. Earth grieves with the Vare Dominion. Earth will help find the cause. Earth will not confess to a finding that has not been made. The chamber went silent. Then she added, lower but clear enough for every recorder to catch. Do not ask humanity to mourn with a lie in its mouth. That was the moment the story stopped being a disaster response. It became a test of whether Earth still owned the meaning of its own words. The first order against Clara arrived before the dead were removed from Aurelian Accord Hall. It did not call itself punishment. Council documents rarely did. It called itself a temporary procedural containment of an unauthorized linguistic deviation during active crisis. Jonas read the order twice in a side room near the medical bay, then lowered the slate as if it had gained weight. They want your translation authority suspended, he said. Clara stood near the transparent wall, watching emergency teams move through the corridor beyond. Vare survivors sat in separate groups, their collars steady now, but their faces empty with shock. Earth medics who had come for the treaty ceremony helped without being asked. They carried air packs, checked seals, and stepped back whenever Vare guards flinched from their uniforms. That was fast, Clara said. They're calling your statement a public contradiction of certified council language. It was. Jonas rubbed a hand over his face. Clara. She turned from the wall. Jonas, if I had read that line, Earth would already be guilty in the archive. Earth may still be treated as guilty. Now they will add defiance. Then we need facts. Before they seal the record. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. Listen to me. I know the translation was wrong. I know what you saw. But the Vare are grieving in front of every major block in council space. The Bureau will say you used wordplay to deny the dead. If Vare fleets move, no one will care about nuance. This is not nuance. It is the difference between standing beside the wounded and causing the wound. That difference may be too human for this room. The sentence hurt because Jonas did not mean it as an insult. He meant it as a warning. In council politics, truth had to pass through systems built by older species that had spent centuries turning grief into claims, claims into obligations, and obligations into control. Humanity's habit of saying sorry for pain it had not caused confused them. Or perhaps Clara thought. It served them to be confused. A Vair guard approached the room and struck the wall once with the back of his hand. The door opened. Marshal Sava Run entered without her ceremonial band. Her eyes were bright and hard. Jonas straightened. Marshal Run, Earth mourns your loss. Sava's gaze moved past him to Clara. Your translator refused to say so. Clara met her eyes. No, I refuse to say Earth caused it before anyone had investigated. Your ceremony, your delegation, your timing. 8 of my people are dead. Yes, Clara said softly. And that deserves truth, not a fast confession written by people who want the room to calm down. Sava moved closer. She was taller than Clara, and her grief made her seem taller still. Do not use truth to hide from pain. I won't. Do not let pain be used to make you accept the wrong target. For the first time, something in Sava's expression shifted. Not trust, not yet, but a small break in the shape of certainty. A council aide appeared behind her before she could answer. Marshal Run, Director Thale requests your presence. The name carried weight. Director Oren Thale led the Interstellar Concordance Bureau. Clara had seen him only in formal broadcasts, a thin, silver-skinned jurist from the old Trine Compact, always dressed in gray and always speaking as if language were a dangerous animal he alone knew how to cage. Sava stepped back. I will hear the investigation, but if Earth used grief to avoid responsibility, I will make sure the Council remembers it for 1,000 cycles. After she left, Clara looked at Jonas. Director Thale is already steering her. Everyone is steering everyone right now. Then I need access to the raw emergency logs. Jonas looked toward the corridor as if the walls themselves might report him. You are suspended. My authority is suspended. My eyes still work. Clara. She softened her voice. You know what this means? If the certified transcript stands, every Earth delegate in Council space inherits that confession. Every lawyer, every trade board, every emergency claim. Their grief becomes real, Earth guilt becomes official, and the cause of the failure becomes secondary. Jonas closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he looked older. You have 3 hours before the emergency review. After that, the Bureau will control the archive. I need one terminal outside their filtered interface. There's a maintenance station under the West Relay Spine. Earth engineers used it during setup. It may still have raw diagnostic access. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. If you are wrong, I may have helped you burn our last bridge. Clara did not answer because he was right. The West Relay Spine ran beneath the public chambers, through a service level that smelled of coolant and old stone. Clara changed out of her formal translator jacket and took an Earth technician's gray oversmock from a storage locker. She moved with her head down and her pace steady. Panic drew attention. Purpose did not, if it looked ordinary enough. The maintenance station was a narrow alcove between 2 atmosphere pumps. An Earth engineer named Rafi Coles had left a toolkit under the console, exactly where Clara remembered seeing him place it that morning. The console still recognized Earth setup credentials, though only for low-level diagnostics. Low-level was enough to start. Clara pulled the emergency log and searched the timestamp from the first warning tone. The public record showed environmental instability, followed by containment response. The raw log showed more. A Vair atmosphere feed had not failed first. It had been isolated. The order came from an internal Council security lattice, routed through a protocol marked protective quarantine. The quarantine classified the Vair breathing mix as a possible contaminant after detecting a trace compound inside the chamber. Clara opened the compound report. The trace was harmless to humans. It was harmless to most species. It was dangerous to Vair only if their breathing collars were forced into emergency intake mode. The system had not protected them. It had trapped them with the condition that made the compound lethal. She copied the raw log to a sealed wafer. Then she checked the origin of the quarantine trigger. The source field was masked behind concordance legal privilege. Clara stared at the phrase. The Bureau had no reason to touch an atmosphere log unless the system had already moved the incident from safety review into legal framing. That meant someone had classified the cause before the bodies were cold. A sound behind her made her turn. A young woman stood at the edge of the alcove, hands raised to show she carried no weapon. She had bronze skin, dark eyes, and the slate-gray collar of a bureau technician. Clara recognized her from the ceremony. She had been seated behind the concordance language desk. "You should not be here," Clara said. "Neither should that log," the woman answered. Her accent was soft from one of the inner council worlds. "My name is Lena Oric. I maintain semantic drift reports for the Bureau." "Then you're the reason the wrong translation was certified." Lena flinched. "No, I'm the reason there's proof it was wrong." Clara waited. Lena stepped into the alcove and placed a small data prism beside the console. The council version of Earth's statement was not an emergency mistake. The lattice followed a standing rule for human sorrow phrases. Any direct grief expression from a linked participant is assigned probable burden unless manually exempted. Who approves exemptions? Director Thale's office. Clara looked at the prism. "Why bring this to me?" "Because I filed objections for 3 years. They disappeared. Because today 8 Ver died, and the Bureau is using their deaths to finish a classification vote against Earth. Because you were the first person I have ever seen turn the system off in public." Clara picked up the prism, but did not connect it yet. "What classification vote?" Lena swallowed. "Humanity is under review for restricted crisis speech status. The Bureau calls it the Human Volatility Index." The words landed like a door locking. "Explain it," Clara said. "The index measures how often a species creates legal instability during emergency diplomacy. Earth scores high because the archive says Earth repeatedly expresses guilt, regret, sorrow, and emotional burden in crisis settings. The Bureau says humans blur grief and responsibility too often to be allowed direct speech when lives or treaties are at risk. That is absurd. It is also scheduled for emergency adoption tomorrow if today's confession is added." Clara felt the service level hum around her. Above them, council officials were not merely trying to close one disaster. They were preparing to use that disaster as the final stone in a wall around Earth's voice. If they pass it, Lena said, Earth delegates will have to speak through certified Bureau renderings in all high-risk sessions. No live correction. No emotional language without legal mapping. No direct appeal to grieving parties. Clara thought of Earth medics in the corridor, stepping back from Ver survivors because they did not know whether help would be read as guilt. She thought of Jonas, prepared to swallow a false line to keep war away. She thought of every human phrase that carried more than one kind of truth. "I'm sorry. We grieve. We stand with you. We should have reached you sooner." A machine could make any of them into a confession if the people controlling it wanted a confession. "Why keep the flaw?" Clara asked. Lena's face tightened. "Because to the older blocks, emotional speech is leverage. They say they're making language precise. They are really making young species easier to prosecute." Footsteps sounded in the service corridor. Lena stepped back. They know someone accessed the raw log. Clara removed the wafer and the prism. "Can you give me the old cases behind the index?" "Some. Not all. The deepest archive is sealed. Get what you can. If I'm caught, they will erase my credentials. If Earth is silenced, they will erase more than that." Lena nodded once and disappeared through a maintenance side door. Clara shut down the console and left the alcove just as 2 council security officers turned the corner. She walked toward them before they could ask why she was there. "Atmosphere Relay 3 is unstable," she said, keeping her voice calm. "If you seal this passage, route staff through the upper stairs. Do not use the Ver lift until the filters are checked." The officers hesitated. They saw an Earth technical oversmock, a controlled expression, and a problem they did not want to own. One of them stepped aside. Clara kept walking. By the time she reached Jonas, council media had already begun showing selected archive clips. Earth delegates in old disasters appear beside translated captions that made them sound guilty, evasive, and unstable. Viewers across council space were being taught what to think before the hearing began. Jonas stood in front of the display, jaw tight. "They moved first," he said. Clara held up the data wafer. "Then we stopped defending ourselves like this is one sentence." He looked at her. "What is it now?" "A pattern. A bureau index." A vote to take away Earth's direct voice in crises. Jonas went very still. How bad? Bad enough that if we lose tomorrow, Earth may still speak in the Council. But only after they translate humanity into something easier to control. The first old case was called the Marrow Rescue. Clara remembered it because every Earth translator remembered it. A civilian ferry from a water-breathing species had lost pressure near the Marrow Belt. Earth rescue pilots arrived late because Council navigation buoys were outdated. They still saved more than 400 passengers. 31 died before the rescue craft could reach the lower compartments. The Earth commander had said, "We are sorry we could not reach them sooner." The Bureau archive rendered it as Earth acknowledges delayed. Response caused death. That one changed sentence followed Earth for years. It punished the people who had risked their lives and made human rescue teams look dangerous in later emergencies. A rescue became a stain on the record because grief had been filed as fault. Clara read the file twice in Jonas's temporary office, then forced herself to move on. The second case was a hospital fire on a joint colony. An Earth doctor had said, "We share your grief." The Bureau rendered it as Earth accepts moral responsibility for the outcome. After that, Earth doctors were pushed out of triage authority on 2 Council stations. The words had not only injured a record, they had changed who was allowed to help the next time people were dying. The third case involved a failed evacuation after a mining collapse. An Earth supervisor had said, "We regret the suffering that happened here." The Bureau rendered it as Earth acknowledges causal involvement in suffering. A labor board later used that line to limit Earth workers from filing claims against the company that owned the mine. That was the cruelty Clara could not ignore. The workers had spoken sorrow, and the system turned it into a weapon against their right to seek justice. By the 5th case, Jonas stopped pacing. By the 7th, he sat down. By the 9th, Clara no longer felt surprise. She felt a cold, disciplined anger settling into place. Lena Oric had smuggled the files through 3 unrelated maintenance channels, each one disguised as a harmless linguistic audit. She included notes in plain language because she understood what Clara needed. Not more complexity. A map. The map showed that the Bureau's translation rules did not merely misunderstand human sorrow. They sorted it into legal categories that benefited the Council's oldest power blocks. Human regret became admission. Human sympathy became liability. Human compassion became instability. The Human Volatility Index sat at the center of it. It was not a public label yet. It was an internal risk score prepared by Director Oren Thale's office and circulated among senior Council blocks. It claimed that Earth had a long pattern of emotionally charged crisis statements. That created uncertain liability. It recommended restricted crisis speech status until human representatives could be trained into more stable expression models. Jonas read that line aloud once, slowly. Trained into more stable expression models. Clara looked up from the files. They do not want us to stop lying. They want us to stop sounding human. Jonas's expression hardened. We need to send this to Earth Command. The Council will say the files are stolen. Are they? Yes. That complicates things. The raw logs from today's incident are ours to request under treaty procedure. The old files are harder. If we use Lena's archive, Thale will destroy her. If we do not use it, he destroys us quietly. Jonas said nothing because there was no clean answer. A notice arrived on the wall display. The Galaxy Council Emergency Chamber would convene at first cycle. Clara Mercer was ordered to appear as the Earth speaker responsible for unauthorized deviation from certified translation during a fatal diplomatic breach. Ambassador Jonas Rell would attend as Earth observer only. Observer only. Clara read the phrase. The Bureau had separated her from Earth's formal authority, turning her into a procedural offender rather than a protected delegate. That was clever. If she lost, Earth could be pressured to disown her. If she won, Council officials could claim the matter was isolated. Jonas saw the same trap. They are making you stand alone, he said. They are trying to. Earth can refuse the hearing. Then the index passes without challenge. Earth can replace you with Council. Then they say I acted outside authority and the certified transcript stands. He folded his hands, thinking, You need a way to make this bigger than your refusal, but smaller than a declaration of war. Language, Clara said. That is the only battlefield they chose, and the only one I can win. Jonas almost smiled. You always did have a dangerous idea of comfort. A soft chime came from the secure door. Jonas checked the feed and frowned. Sava Run is outside. Alone. Clara stood. Sava entered without guards this time. Her breathing collar was black again, but its pulse was slower. The rage had not left her. It had become focused. Director Thale, show me old Earth records, she said. Many confessions, many apologies, many incidents where your people spoke sorrow after harm. He showed you translations, Clara said. He showed me council records. Those are not always the same thing. Sava looked toward Jonas, then back to Clara. You speak as if my dead are a debate about words. Clara felt the blow and accepted it. No, your dead are the reason words matter. If the wrong party is blamed quickly, the real cause stays alive for someone else. You have evidence of another cause. Clara hesitated. The raw atmosphere log was safer than Lena's stolen archive. It was also incomplete. The chamber did not fail from Earth equipment, she said. A council internal security lattice isolated your atmosphere feed. I saw the raw order. Sava's eyes changed. Council told me an Earth-linked protocol triggered the failure. They told you a legal conclusion, not a technical chain. Show me. Jonas started to speak, then stopped. Clara took the wafer from her pocket and placed it on the table. Jonas looked at her with warning in his eyes, but he did not stop her. Sava watched the raw log in silence. She did not understand every technical line, but she understood source authority, internal lattice, and masked by concordance privilege. When the display ended, she did not accuse Clara of forgery. She did not apologize either. If this is true, Sava said, then the council used my dead to demand your confession while hiding its own failure. Yes. Sava's jaw tightened. And you knew this when you refused to read? No, I only knew the words were false. That answer seemed to strike Sava more deeply than any proof. She looked at Clara as if seeing her for the first time, not as an obstacle, but as someone who had stepped into danger before knowing the size of it. Tomorrow, Sava said, Thale will tell the chamber that Ver Dominion demands Earth's certified apology. Do you? Sava was quiet for a long moment. I demand the truth of why my people died. I still demand grief from Earth, if Earth grieves. I will not yet demand guilt from Earth. It was not alliance. It was not trust, but it was movement. After she left, Jonas exhaled. That may have saved us. Only if she says it publicly. Will she? Clara looked at the closed door. If we give her enough truth to stand on. The problem was that truth was now divided across dangerous places. Clara had the raw atmosphere log, but not the unmasked source. She had Lena's old translation files, but using them could expose a whistleblower. She had Sava's doubt, but not her support. She had Jonas's quiet backing, but not full Earth authority. Oren Thale had the Bureau, the certified archive, the emergency procedure, the media frame, and the Council's fear of open disorder. He also had time. Before the station evening briefing, Clara forced herself to read one more file that Lena had marked with a quiet warning. It involved a small Earth food convoy that had arrived after a famine zone was already stabilized by another species. The Earth coordinator had said, "We are sorry we came too late to help more." The Bureau had rendered it as Earth admits late arrival reduced survival rates. A relief court later used that line to block Earth from bidding on emergency food routes for 6 years. Clara sat with that file longer than the others. It was not dramatic. No fleets moved because of it. No chamber filled with shouting delegates. But it showed the real cruelty of the system. The Bureau did not always strike Earth in moments large enough for history. Sometimes it cut quietly, one route, one license, one trusted role at a time, until humanity looked less reliable on paper than it had ever been in the field. That was how a civilization could be lowered without a declaration. Not by one public insult, but by hundreds of certified distortions that became policy before anyone had time to challenge them. Clara understood, then, that tomorrow's hearing was not only about the right to speak during disaster. It was about every quiet door that had closed on Earth because a human sentence had been filed under the wrong kind of truth. By late station evening, the council channels carried a new statement from the Bureau. It said Clara's unauthorized language deviation had aggravated their grief and deepened the diplomatic wound. It said the Bureau would present historical evidence that Earth representatives often blurred apology, fault, regret, and operational responsibility. It also said the emergency vote on human crisis speech restrictions had been moved forward in the interest of stability. The message was polished, calm, and devastating. Jonas watched it with Clara from the office. "They are not waiting for tomorrow." "No," Clara said. "They're making tomorrow feel inevitable." Her private comm vibrated once. A file arrived from Lena with no greeting. Only one line. "This is why Thale cannot let the raw language be heard." Clara opened the attachment. It was not another translation file. It was an internal Bureau training lecture from 5 years earlier. Director Thale stood before a room of senior linguistic officers, younger but already cold in the same precise way. Behind him, a chart divided species into categories by emotional speech risk. Humanity sat near the top. Thale's recorded voice was clear. Human sorrow language is uniquely problematic. It projects fellowship without accepting defined burden. This allows human representatives to influence injured parties emotionally while avoiding stable legal consequence. The concordance model must convert such expressions into accountable categories. Mercy without liability destabilizes law. Clara paused the recording. Jonas stared at the screen. There it was. Not a bug. Not a misunderstanding. A doctrine. Mercy without liability destabilizes law. Clara felt the shape of the hearing change in her mind. Thale would not be defeated by proving the machine made errors. He could absorb errors. He could call them technical drift. He could promise review. But doctrine was different. Doctrine showed intent. Clara replayed the final line. Mercy without liability destabilizes law. She thought of the phrase Earth had tried to say. "We grieve with you." Two worldviews sat across from each other. One said grief must become burden to matter. The other said grief could stand beside pain without stealing the truth. That was the real trial. Not Clara, not even Earth alone. The council was about to decide whether a civilization had the right to be compassionate without being trapped by its compassion. Clara copied the lecture into 3 sealed channels. One went to Jonas. One went to an Earth legal reserve. One went to a dead drop Lena had given her, so the technician could prove the file had left her hands before the hearing. Then Clara sat alone for a while, reading the statements she had translated over the years. Human grief had many shapes. Formal grief, awkward grief, guilty grief, helpless grief, grief that came with responsibility, and grief that came only with love. The Bureau wanted one drawer for all of it. She began drafting not a defense, but a sequence. First, the true words. Then, the false renderings. Then, the harm those renderings caused. Then, the human volatility index. Then, Thale's doctrine. Then, the Ver raw log. And last, if the chamber still chose stability over truth, Clara would do the one thing the Bureau feared most. She would ask the council to listen without translation. Before she entered the chamber, Clara understood the fight clearly. She was no longer defending only her own refusal. She was defending Earth's right, and perhaps every young species' right, to speak pain without an old system turning into guilt. The Galaxy Council emergency chamber was not shaped like a court, but that made it more dangerous. Courts admitted they were built to judge. The chamber claimed to be built to preserve order. Its floor curved in 3 wide rings around a central speaking well. Delegates from senior blocks sat closest to the center. Newer members sat higher, where their voices had to pass through more layers of procedure before reaching the record. Above them all, the translation lattice shimmered like a pale net of light. Clara entered alone. Jonas sat in the Earth Observer section, 3 levels up, his hands folded tightly before him. Marshal Savarun stood with the Ver delegation near the second ring. Director Oren Thale waited at the Bureau dais, dressed in gray, his expression calm enough to seem bored. That calm was his weapon. The presiding speaker, Aaron Voss of a neutral at Hari, opened the session. His species had long faces and soft voices, and they prided themselves on sounding gentle while enforcing brutal procedure. This emergency review concerns the fatal incident at Aurelian Accord Hall, the deviation of Earth translator Clara Mercer from certified council rendering, and the proposed temporary restriction of Earth's crisis speech privileges pending full inquiry. Temporary. Proposed. Pending. Clara heard the softeners and knew none of them were soft. Aaron Voss turned to the bureau dais. Director Thale may present the concordance record. Thale rose. His voice was smooth, careful, and almost kind. Honor delegates. The Bureau does not stand against Earth. We stand for stable meaning in unstable moments. After the tragic deaths of their representatives, Earth submitted an expression of sorrow. The concordance lattice rendered that expression into accountable council language. Chief Translator Mercer publicly rejected that rendering, creating confusion during acute grief. A display opened above him. It showed Clara at the podium, shutting down the lattice. Thale continued. This would be troubling as a single breach. It is more troubling as part of a pattern. The Bureau has compiled historical cases in which Earth representatives used sorrow language after events in which Earth was linked to harm. These statements repeatedly blur emotional fellowship and responsibility. The display changed. Marrow rescue. Hospital fire. Mining collapse. Evacuation dispute. Each record appeared with council-certified translations. Earth accepts fault. Earth accepts moral responsibility. Earth acknowledges causal involvement. A murmur moved through the chamber. Clara did not interrupt. She needed the room to see the trap before she showed the bars. Thale turned toward her. Chief Translator Mercer may believe human language deserves special exemption, but no species can be allowed to use emotional ambiguity to influence grieving parties while avoiding consequence. The Bureau therefore recommends restricted crisis speech status for Earth until human delegates complete concordance stabilization training. The words sounded reasonable if one ignored what they meant. Earth would not be silent. It will be managed. It would speak, but only through the Bureau. It would grieve, but only in terms the Bureau could prosecute. Aaron Voss looked at Clara. You may answer. Clara stepped into the speaking well. The lattice brightened above her, waiting to catch her words. She looked up. I request direct dual record. My words in Earth English, followed by my own trade common rendering. No concordance, legal mapping. The chamber stirred. Thale's face did not change. Denied. Direct dual record is reserved for founding species and certified sacred speech. Clara looked to Aaron Voss. Then note for the record that the Bureau intends to judge Earth's meaning while refusing Earth the right to present that meaning unfiltered. Avons-vous hésité? It was a small hesitation, but the chamber noticed. The request is entered as procedural objection. You may proceed under standard lattice monitoring. Clara expected that. She had not asked to receive permission. She had asked to show the room what permission was being withheld. She began with the present case. The original Earth statement after the Aurelian deaths was simple. We grieve with you. Earth will assist fully in finding the cause. The certified rendering changed that statement into we accept guilt before you. Earth will comply fully in assigning responsibility. The two texts appeared above her. Clara had forced them into the display request Jonas filed as observer evidence. The Bureau could not block it without looking afraid. Director Thale says this made the sentence accountable. I say it made the sentence false. Grief is not guilt. Assistance is not confession. Finding a cause is not the same as assigning blame before investigation. Thale rose slightly. Chief Translator Mercer is arguing emotional preference over legal stability. No, Clara said. I'm arguing meaning. She opened the Marrow rescue file. In this case, an Earth commander said, we are sorry we could not reach them sooner. The Bureau rendered it as Earth acknowledges delayed response caused death. The first sentence came from rescuers who had saved hundreds and grieved the ones they could not reach. The second sentence turned that grief into fault. It was later used to punish Earth rescue carriers. The display showed the original audio wave, the Earth transcript, the Bureau translation, and the penalty record. Somewhere in the upper rings, a delegate whispered too loudly for the chamber to ignore. That is not equivalent. Clara let the words hang for a breath. Then she moved to the hospital fire. An Earth doctor said, "We share your grief." The Bureau rendered it as Earth accepts moral responsibility for the outcome. That changed comfort into blame. It helped remove Earth doctors from triage authority on 2 council stations. A medical delegate in the second ring lowered her gaze. Clara saw it and continued. Then she moved to the mining collapse. An Earth supervisor said, "We regret the suffering that happened here." The Bureau rendered it as Earth acknowledges causal involvement in suffering. That changed sorrow into causation. It limited Earth workers from filing claims against the company that owned the site. She did not rush. Each case had to land as a fact, not a flourish. Thales' calm began to sharpen. The chief translator is selecting emotionally charged examples from complex files. I am selecting files used in your human volatility index. The chamber changed, not loudly. The council was too trained for that. But bodies shifted. Eyes moved to Thale. Savaren's head turned. Aaron Voss leaned forward. Clarify the term. Clara brought up the index header. The Human Volatility Index is an internal Bureau risk score recommending restricted crisis speech status for Earth. It uses cases like these to argue that humanity creates instability through emotional language. The current Aurelian statement is listed as the final qualifying incident. She paused long enough for the room to absorb the chain. If Earth's false confession is added, this chamber will be asked to restrict Earth's direct voice in future emergencies. Thale spoke before Aaron Voss could. The index is a preventive framework, not a sanction. It protects injured parties from manipulative ambiguity. Clara turned toward him. By changing what we said, by rendering what your speech does. There it was. The doctrine in living form. Clara opened the training lecture. For the first time, Thale's expression moved. Only a flicker, but Clara saw it. His younger image appeared above the chamber, speaking to Bureau officers 5 years earlier. Human sorrow language is uniquely problematic. It projects fellowship without accepting defined burden. The concordance model must convert such expressions into accountable categories. Mercy without liability destabilizes law. The recording ended. Silence followed. Clara did not fill it too quickly. Silence was also language. Sometimes it did work that speech could not. Then she said, Director Thale told his bureau what to do. Do not translate human mercy. Convert it. Do not hear human grief. Categorize it. Do not let humans stand beside the wounded unless they can be made useful to a case. That is not translation. That is prosecution. Thale's voice hardened. This recording is internal instructional material taken without authorization. Is it false? Is contextually misused? Is it false? He did not answer. The chamber understood silence too. Thale changed ground. Even if the Bureau model requires review, that does not absolve Earth from the Aurelian incident. The Ver dead remained dead. Earth was linked to the ceremony. The public requires accountability. Clara nodded once. Yes, the Ver dead remained dead. That is why we should not bury the cause under a convenient confession. She opened the raw atmosphere log. Aaron Voss looked alarmed. This is a technical matter under separate review. It is the reason the Bureau demanded a confession before review. The display showed the timeline from the first warning tone to the fatal atmosphere isolation. Clara kept her explanation plain. The Ver atmosphere feed did not simply fail. It was isolated by an internal council security lattice after a harmless trace compound was misclassified under protective quarantine. The order source was then masked under concordance legal privilege. Earth equipment did not issue that order. A Ver device did not issue that order. A council system did. Savarin stepped forward from the Ver section. Aaron Voss turned to her. Marshal Run, you are not scheduled to speak. At this stage. My dead are the subject of this stage, Sava said. The chamber went still again. Sava faced the central floor. Ver Dominion demanded Earth's apology because we were told Earth triggered the breach. I have now seen raw evidence that the council system may have sealed the chamber. I have also seen that the Bureau altered Earth's words before my people heard them. Their dominion does not withdraw its grief. We do not withdraw our demand for truth, but we withdraw our demand for a confession based on concordance rendering. The word struck harder than any argument Clara could have made. They'll turn toward Sava. Marshal, run. Grief should not be redirected by an accused party's translator. Sava's collar pulsed dark. Do not instruct me in grief while standing over the words you changed. For the first time, Director Thale looked isolated, but not defeated. He lifted one hand, and a new display opened. It showed a council procedural clause. Under emergency preservation doctrine, he said, the chamber may still adopt restricted speech measures if a species' live emotional language creates risk of escalation. Today's events prove that Earth's uncontrolled speech can inflame proceedings. Chief Translator Mercer has turned a fatal safety incident into a legitimacy attack on the council itself. It was the final move. If he could not win on translation, he would win on order. Clara had challenged the system, so he would call the challenge dangerous. Some delegates looked ready to accept it, not because they trusted him, but because the alternative frightened them. If the Bureau could be wrong about humanity, it could be wrong about others. If certified language could be used to control younger species, then many comfortable old decisions would need reopening. Systems did not fear error. They feared precedent. Clara understood, then, that evidence alone would not finish this. The chamber had seen the facts. Now it needed to decide whether those facts mattered more than its own convenience. She looked up at the translation lattice. Speaker Voss, she said, I renew my request for direct dual record, not as privilege, as remedy. If the Bureau is accused of corrupting meaning, the accused Bureau cannot be the only channel through which meaning reaches this chamber. Aaron Voss looked toward the senior ring. Delegates conferred. Thale stood rigid at the Bureau dais. At last, Voss said, the request is granted for a limited statement. The lattice dimmed. For the first time since Clara entered, there was no pale net above her words. She breathed once. Then she spoke in English, knowing many in the room would not understand the sound before the meaning. That was the point. They had to hear that a living language existed before their systems touched it. When Earth says we are sorry, we are not always kneeling. Sometimes we are standing beside the wounded because no soul should be left alone in pain. You called that guilt because your system had no word for mercy. That is not our failure. That is yours. She translated herself in a trade common, slowly, without adding force the English had not carried. Then she turned to Savaron. Earth grieves with their dominion. Earth will help find why your people died. Earth will not steal your dead for our innocence, and we will not let the council use your dead for our guilt. Sava did not move, but her eyes lowered for one breath, and in their custom, Clara knew that meant the words had been received. Aaron Voss called for recess. The chamber erupted into controlled disorder. Delegates demanded review. Bureau aides clustered around Thale. Their envoys withdrew with Sava. Jonas leaned back in the Earth Observer section and covered his mouth with one hand, as if only then allowing himself to feel the size of what had happened. Clara remained in the speaking well until the recording lights dimmed. She had not won yet, but the Bureau no longer owned the room. The recess lasted 46 minutes, long enough for 3 senior blocks to try saving the Bureau without appearing to defend it. Clara spent the time in a side chamber with Jonas, 2 Earth legal officers on delayed comm, and 1 silent council guard posted by the door. Her throat ached from speaking in controlled tones. Her hands finally trembled when she accepted a cup of water. Jonas noticed and said nothing until she set the cup down. Earth Command is watching, he said. They authorized you to continue as direct language representative. Clara gave a tired laugh. Now, they authorize it. They also said not to start a war with grammar. Too late. He smiled despite himself, then sobered. Thale is negotiating. He will offer a technical review, maybe a temporary pause on the index. He will try to keep the Bureau's legal authority intact. If he keeps legal authority, he keeps the weapon. Agreed. But some blocks will not vote to dismantle a system they rely on. Clara looked through the side window at the chamber beyond. Delegates moved in clusters beneath the dimmed lattice. Then we do not ask them to dismantle it. We ask them to limit what it can do without consent from the species being translated. That still changes council law. Good. Jonas studied her. You know what happens after this, even if we win? Every statement Earth has ever made becomes a fight. Every old sanction becomes a petition. Every species that was translated by the Bureau will ask whether it was heard or managed. Then maybe the Council should have thought of that before building order out of misheard grief. The guard by the door shifted. A message came through his wrist channel. He opened the door. Marshal Sava entered. Jonas straightened, but Sava raised a hand. I came to speak to Clara Mercer. Clara stood. Marshal. Sava looked as if the last hour had aged her. My delegation has reviewed the raw atmosphere log with our own engineers. We believe the Council security lattice caused the fatal isolation. We do not yet know whether it was negligence, design failure, or worse. I'm sorry, Clara said, then stopped. The room became very quiet. Sava watched her. Clara did not take the words back. She did not explain them away. She let them stand in the human shape they had. I mean, that is grief, Clara said. Not confession. I know, Sava answered. It was a small sentence. It carried more weight than any ruling so far. Sava placed a Vare memory band on the table. It was dark blue, the color of formal mourning. These are the names of the 8 we lost. If Earth speaks again in the chamber, speak with their names present. Not as proof for you, not as proof against you, as the reason this must be true. Clara picked up the band with both hands. I will. When the chamber reconvened, the air felt different. Not kinder. Not safe, but awake. Aaron Voss opened the record and announced 3 matters before the delegates. First, whether to adopt restricted crisis speech status for Earth. Second, whether to suspend the legal authority of concordance renderings in cases involving human emotional language. Third, whether to open a full inquiry into the Aurelian safety failure and the masking of source authority under Bureau privilege. Thale rose to speak first. He looked less calm now, but not broken. Men like him rarely broke in public. They narrowed. The Bureau acknowledges the possibility of semantic drift in specific human grief constructions, he said. We propose a technical committee, a temporary annotation system, and continued use of concordance authority during review. Removing that authority in a crisis would endanger the stability of council law. Clara heard the old rhythm. Erd mitt folk. Key power. Aaron Voss looked to her. Earth may answer. Clara stepped forward with Sava's memory band in her hand. 8 Vare representatives died at Aurelian Accord Hall, she said. Their names are here. I will not use them as a shield for Earth. I will not let anyone use them as a tool against Earth. They deserve the cause of their deaths, not a convenient sentence from a translator's desk. She placed the band on the central evidence stand. Director Thale calls this semantic drift. But drift does not build an index. Drift does not train officers to convert mercy into liability. Drift does not mask safety logs under legal privilege while demanding another species confess. Drift is an accident. This was a structure. The display behind her showed 3 columns now. Original Earth words. Mourning. Legal consequence. The Bureau does not need to be destroyed for the Council to survive, Clara said. But no translation system should hold the power to create guilt where a species expressed grief. No automatic rendering should become legal evidence, unless the civilization being quoted can confirm that the meaning is true. No government, no council, no bureau should own the inside of another species' sorrow. Thale interrupted. Without central authority, every species will claim special meaning whenever law becomes inconvenient. Clara turned to him. No, every species will have the right to say when a machine has lied about its soul. The chamber stilled again. That sentence moved farther than she expected. She saw it reach the upper rings, where younger member worlds sat with limited votes and long memories. She saw it reach delegates who had never trusted the Bureau, but had lacked a public wound large enough to challenge it. She saw it reach Sava, whose grief had been used as pressure until she forced it back into truth. Jonas had told Clara not to start a war with grammar. But this was not grammar anymore. It was sovereignty. The vote on restricted crisis speech status for Earth failed first. Not by a huge margin, but by enough. Several blocs abstained rather than side with Thale. The Vare Dominion voted against the restriction. The second vote passed after amendments. The Council suspended the use of automatic concordance renderings as independent legal evidence in cases involving contested emotional, spiritual, mourning, or responsibility language. Any such rendering would require confirmation from a certified representative of the civilization being quoted. The third vote opened a full inquiry into the Aurelian safety failure, the mass security order, and the Bureau's role in classifying the incident before technical review. Then came the vote Clara had not expected. A younger delegate from the Heroine Collective requested immediate invalidation of the Human Volatility Index. Another from the outer colonies seconded it. The index had never been public law, Thale argued, so invalidation was unnecessary. That argument destroyed him. If it was not law, the chamber asked, why had it been used to recommend restriction? If it was law, why had Earth never been allowed to challenge it? The index was nullified by emergency order. Oren Thale remained standing through the vote. His face revealed almost nothing. But when the result appeared, he looked not at Clara, not at Sava, not at Aaron Voss. He looked up at the translation lattice, as if betrayed by the very net he had used to bind others. Clara felt no triumph watching him. Triumph would have been too simple. She felt the heavy relief of a door not fully opened, but no longer sealed. The Council did not apologize to Earth that day. Councils rarely moved that quickly toward humility. It issued a formal acknowledgement of linguistic harm and procedural overreach. Jonas called it bloodless. Clara called it useful. Bloodless language could still change law, if forced into the right shape. Earth's direct crisis speech rights were restored. Old cases involving human grief language were ordered for review. Lena Oric received provisional whistleblower protection through a Vare motion, not an Earth one. Sovereign insisted on it. She said the person who helped reveal a falsehood in the matter of Vare dead would not be handed back quietly to the office that hid it. By the time Clara left the chamber, the station had entered its sleep cycle. Aurelian Accord Hall looked almost peaceful again, though one corridor remained sealed and 8 Vare mourning lamps burned beside the signing dais. Sava waited near the memorial room. No recorders hovered around her. No council aides stood close enough to listen. For once, the hall offered privacy not as secrecy, but as mercy. Clara approached slowly. Mourning. Sava looked at the mourning lamps through the glass wall. My brother died in a raid 2 years ago. At his memorial, an Earth nurse stood beside me. She had treated refugees from the same attack. She said she was sorry. I thought she meant she pitied us. Later, the council transcript said she had accepted Earth burden for inadequate aid delivery. Sava kept her gaze on the lamps. I was angry at her for months. I thought she had used my grief to protect her people. Clara said nothing. Today, I requested the original audio. Sava continued. She was crying when she said it. Not for law, not for burden. For him. For us. The words hung between them. Sava turned. How many times have we hated each other through someone? Elsa's translation. Clara thought of the archive, the penalties, the hearings that might have gone differently, and the alliances that had cooled because human warmth had been filed as manipulation. Too many, she said. Sava gave a short nod, accepting the answer because there was no better one. Clara took a breath. Earth grieves with the Vare Dominion. We grieve for Arvin's soul, Tira Vin, Cave, or Malaz Rin, Doran Ve, Siraketh, Olamer, and your aid, Reth Sava. We will help find why they died. We will not call grief justice, and we will not call a lie peace. Sava's breathing collar pulsed once, deep blue. That, Sava said, I understand. There was no embrace. Vare did not touch in mourning outside kinship. There was no sudden forgiveness. The dead remained dead. The inquiry had only begun. The council would resist its own shame in 100 quiet ways. But something had changed. Not everything. Not enough. But something real. For the first time since the alarm at Aurelian Accord Hall, Clara felt the difference between a wound and a trap. The wound still hurt. The trap had broken. She left the memorial room and found Jonas waiting in the corridor. Earth Command wants a full report, he said. They can have one. They also want to know how you plan to describe today's outcome. Clara looked back at the morning lamps. Accurately. Jonas almost laughed. That will terrify them. Good. They walked together toward the Earth docking lift. Outside the long windows, Verdun's pale curve turned beneath the station, quiet and distant. Somewhere beyond it lay Earth, full of languages that did not always behave. Earth was full of people who said sorry at funerals, in hospital rooms, after storms, beside strangers, across kitchen tables, and in places where no law had any business standing between one soul and another. The Galaxy Council had tried to make that habit into weakness. They had tried to make it into guilt. For years, it nearly succeeded because its systems sounded precise and humans sounded soft. But softness was not surrender. Mercy was not liability. And grief, Clara knew now, could be one of the strongest forms of truth if someone refused to let power rename it. At the docking gate, the station translation system asked her to confirm departure language for the Earth delegation. The prompt offered 3 approved categories: regret, compliance, acknowledgement of burden. Clara stared at them for a moment. Then she selected manual entry. Jonas looked over. What are you writing? Clara typed slowly, making sure each word stood where she wanted it. Earth departs in mourning and in truth. The system paused, searching for a category. For the first time, it found none. Clara sent the line anyway. In the end, Clara Mercer did not need a fleet, a weapon, or a threat to shake the council. She only refused to let a broken system turn the human heart into a crime. That refusal stayed behind after she left Aurelian Accord Hall. It stayed in the morning lamps, in the reopened files, in Sovereign's quiet understanding, and in every young species that would now ask whether its own words had ever been changed before they reached the room. Earth had not won a clean victory. The dead were still dead. The inquiry still had to face the truth. But one thing had been taken back. When humanity said, "We are sorry," the galaxy could no longer decide on its own that humanity was kneeling. Sometimes, sorry meant grief. Sometimes it meant mercy. Sometimes it meant a hand offered beside the wounded, with no chain hidden inside it. And Clara Mercer made the council hear that difference. If this story stayed with you, please give it a like. It helps more listeners find stories like this. Share it with someone who enjoys science fiction with heart, dignity, and the kind of human courage that does not need a fleet to shake the galaxy. And if you want more stories about Earth, humanity, and the moments when the galaxy learns it misunderstood us, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening. Your time, your support, and your voice help keep these stories alive.